about this kind of loneliness epidemic where people, despite living right next to one another and seemingly being in a community, still feel a sense of isolation and hopelessness.
For me, I was creating the communities that I'd like to be part of. To talk about climate is to talk about life.
There's nothing as connecting as purpose. The power of the climate action in terms of loneliness is that we come together on an aligned purpose.
It's impossible to talk about climate change, to talk about environmental injustice without talking about race injustice.
Welcome to SystemShift, a podcast from Greenpeace International, which explores how we can create a better economic system that benefits both people and the planet. The theme of this series is change, and each episode we speak to guests across the world to hear how they're changing the planet for the better. I'm Yewande Omotosho. I'm a writer, novelist, and I work on storytelling at Greenpeace.
And I'm Joycelyn Longden, an environmental justice technologist, writer, and educator, working at the intersection of environmental justice and nature technology. For this episode, we're asking the question, are urban communities a remedy for loneliness? We'll be looking at how urban communities become solidarity and resistance networks, what those networks are and mean in practice, and how they can tackle a loss of hope during this crisis. We put a poll on our Instagram page where we asked people if they felt a sense of community where they lived. And responses were surprisingly pretty balanced, with 37% of people saying yes, 35% saying no, and 28% not being quite sure. We also asked, how do you feel after participating in a protest or a collective initiative? And here's what some of you had to say.
That I am not alone in my beliefs.
Empowered and inspired.
I feel united, connected with love.
Hopeful. Things can get better.
It's interesting, Joycelyn, the results of that poll we put up. There's something quite profound about looking at loneliness as a symptom of something, deeper in society. And there is, despite the balanced poll, there's a lot of research and articles that are talking about this kind of loneliness epidemic where people, despite living right next to one another and seemingly being in a community, still feel a sense of isolation and hopelessness. And so I'm quite really curious to see the ways in which forming community around tackling the climate crisis starts to address that epidemic. Can it? I also feel like okay, is that wishful thinking? Is it convenient? We hope it can, or is it deeper than that? So I'm really curious to kind of delve into that with our guest.
Yes, in this episode, we're going to be joined by Amanda Costa, a climate activist, young UN ambassador. Amanda runs Perifa Sustentável, Sustainable Periphery, an institute that mobilizes young people in favor of a real and fair sustainable development agenda for Brazil, based on racial and environmental justice.
Welcome to the podcast, Amanda. It's wonderful to have you here and be talking to you.
Thank you so much for this invitation. I am excited and I think the conversation will be amazing.
I'm very aware that you are multilingual. I have a few other languages I speak, but Portuguese is not one of them. And so I wanted to invite you to, Joycelyn, if you agree, maybe we could have a lesson from Amanda.
I really want to learn Portuguese. So any, even earth-related, environmental-related phrases would be amazing.
Yeah, of course. I will say a small sentence in Portuguese and then I want you girls to repeat after me. Esse podcast está sendo gravado por 3 incríveis mulheres negras. I just said that this podcast is being recorded by 3 incredible, beautiful black women. This could be a little bit hard, so just let's begin saying beautiful black women. That is Lindas Mulheres Negras. Can you say this?
Lindas Mulheres Negras.
Woo. You girls are rock. Amazing. Oh my gosh, please come to Brazil. Please. Brazil needs you.
I want to. I'll be there. I'll be coming to visit you.
It is really, truly wonderful to have you here. I need to say I wanted to learn more about you, and I looked around and I was deeply moved by your the talk you gave. There's a TED talk that you gave that I found really moving. And maybe that's a good entry, I guess, into our conversation today. Your work, a lot of your work is about peripheries. And so maybe a good start is just to understand from you what that means, peripheries, and why is that a focus of yours?
I am the founder of Instituto Perifa Sustentável. I'm here, our t-shirt. Perifa Sustentável means sustainable outcourse, sustainable Islam. Here in Brazil, we have favelas. And a lot of people see favelas as the crime space, a very dangerous space, a poor space. But it isn't just about this. Favelas is also a place of innovation. Creativity is a place of power. So in 2017, the climate activism arrived in my life. I was in the university. I took international relations and I applied for a scholarship, and I was chosen to travel to Bonn in Germany and to be part of Camp Climate. It was a small delegation in the World YMCA that select young leaders from all over the world to represent their countries in the United Nations conference. And I was like, oh my God, this is my dream as an international relations student. And when I was there, I started to feel uncomfortable because I saw a lot of rich people, white men from Europe countries, talking about how the climate crisis will impact my community, Black communities, indigenous communities, Latin America communities, Africa communities. And I was thinking with myself, why I'm not speaking? Why I'm not with the microphone on my hands? Because I have the empirical knowledge, like I am facing the climate crisis. So as soon as I come back to Brazil, I decided that I will be a climate voice in my country. And in the beginning, it was really challenging because my people, like Black people in Brazil, at this time, they didn't want to hear about climate. They was saying things like, Amanda, really? Are you going to speak about climate? We are dying because of the poverty. We are dying because of the police. And you're talking about climate? And I was like, oh my God, how could I make a bridge to show that to talk about climate is to talk about life, is to talk about our life. So I think this is the beginning of my activism, and I decided that is it possible to be both in the community level and in the international space? Because in this United Nations conference, they're talking about our lives, and we want and we need to be part of these discussions.
Amanda, so beautiful. I just really love the passion that you have, and also the way that you describe, a lot of these experiences that especially people of color in this space have in trying to balance, representing your community and also making change on an international level whilst facing, systems that are partly the reason that your community in the first place is experiencing the, disproportionate effects of the climate crisis. I'm really interested in how you received this feedback from your community and, you started needing to make this bridge.
In the second year, 2018, I started to be part of Engajamundo. Engajamundo means like engaging the world. It's a Brazilian organization that is empower young people to be part of the decision-making process and also to lead our community. So I engaged with Engajamundo in 2018, and in the end of this year, I traveled to Katowice in Poland to participate in COP24. We were in a delegation of 11 people, and I was like so inspired by my friends, like we can make the change, let's do it, we are rock. So as soon as I come back to my country, I remember that I was like with a lot of energy in my heart. I want to make the change happen, and I know that I need to start in my house. So I asked to my parents to come to my bedroom, the same space that you are seeing right now. And I said, please sit on the bed. I need to talk with you. And they were looking at me like you with this face. And I said, first of all, we need to change. We are part of the solution. So we need to change. First, do you know that red meat is part of the climate crisis? So we need to change. We need to change the way that we eat. We need to protect the earth. Second, we need to use public transportation. We need to use public transport. We need to be more sustainable. And third, who are the people that you voted in the last elections? Are you following these decision makers? Are you following these politicians? We need to understand what they are doing, and we need to be part of these kind of conversations. We need to influence them. And you can imagine my parents, they were looking at me like, what is talking about? And when I finished, my mother said, are you done? And I was like, I am. And my mother, she looked at me and she said, girl, se liga, garota. It's like a Brazilian expression to say, girl, shut up. When I was in your age, I couldn't eat meat because my mother, she couldn't afford. I need to use public transport for a long time in my life. I need to suffer abuse because I couldn't have a car, and a lot of men, they weren't nice in the public transport. And now that I have a car, you're saying that I cannot use my car. Girl, shut up. And I was like, what? What is going on? What is going on? So I understood that if I want to share the climate ambition and the climate values and how to build a more sustainable community, first, I need to shut up my mouth and start to listen, start to connect with the reality of my community.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I mean, you're such an inspiration, and you tell your story, and it gives me goosebumps. I mean, you recount, I think, the scene with your parents in your bedroom. There's something really profound about that, because I think you understood intrinsically where you had to start. And we've been having a conversation, and that's what this podcast is about, the kind of dichotomy between being an urban dweller, feeling isolated, feeling overwhelmed maybe by one's condition, one's life, one's restrictions. And then on the other side, building a community and being part of a community and doing this work and taking these climate actions. And you sort of told us the story that shows how you traversed that line, and so I think there's a way in which you're such an example. And of course, I'm sure you know that, but one maybe can't hear that enough.
And, you're talking about favelas. What lessons do you learn from this urban community?
My parents, they worked so hard that I could go to the university, that I could travel, that I could have the basic needs to invest in my education. So I kind of disconnect of the reality of my community. So I need to come back. So this symbol of my t-shirt, Sankofa, means that come back and learn with people who are our ancestors. So I start to stop talking and I start to listen. I start to talk with people in my neighborhood. I start to understand that we are talking about the same thing, but we are using other words. Because I was not talking Portuguese with them. I was talking in technical ways. I was talking in the European vision of a sustainable future means. And when I understood this, I realized that I need to talk about capitalist system. I need to listen first, and I need to make connections to show the common problem that is climate change. And it's impossible to talk about climate change, to talk about environmental injustice without talking about race injustice. Because in Brazil reality, these issues, they are connected. We are a country that faced slavery, exploitation, and colonization. So we need to understand this background to promote an inclusive view about these issues.
How does your work within urban communities, within informal communities, link to environmental action, and how do you make that connection?
With Perifa Sustentável Institute, I'm really proud of my organization because Perifa Sustentável was born in 2019. And at this time, in this period, I realized that I need to do something. I was part of Engajamundo, but in Brazilian reality, who are the people who can do volunteer work? Who are the people who have time? People who do not need to work to have the basic needs. It's not the reality of Black people in Brazil. So it was the same period that I figured out that I am Black. And you could say, hey, Amanda, you didn't know that you are Black? And I was like, it's a shame. No, because my mother, she's white, and my father, he is Black. And I didn't have a racial literacy when I was a kid. So it's kind of weird because I figured out myself as a climate activist before I figured out myself as a Black girl. And I started to feel uncomfortable in the climate space because I started to look to people and I was the only Black girl in that kind of space. And they were talking about Black people, indigenous people, and how climate crisis will impact impoverished communities. And I was like, these white people are talking about my reality. When I understood all of this, I understood that I should create something to my people. So I decided to create a project. And in the beginning, Perifa Sustentável was a project to democratize the climate debate in vulnerable communities. I was doing a lot of actions in my neighborhood. I was promoting like a virtual space to talk about environmentalism and Blackness, because at this moment in my reality in Brazil, it was like, whoa, it's possible to relate climate and Blackness. I was speaking with people who are in the decision-making space, people who have money, people who can afford the change. And one of these connections told me, Amanda, you should create an organization. It was amazing because it's like I could show to young people how to do climate advocacy, how to learn more about climate crisis.
So much of your work is like right in the work of making connections, this thing of these intersections. And it's really profound how you understood just through particularly the conversation with your parents that you can't talk environmental justice and not talk racial justice, not talk gender, not talk, these things are connected. That's what makes it real. You know, it's not about, as you said, the rich white folk, you know, sitting at a desk somewhere. These are real issues. And I'm sort of quoting you because you talked about how you wrote an article called "The Climate Crisis is Not a Rich White Man's Thing." So that's why I was referring to that paper. But you talked about that in a piece you wrote. You know, it's interesting for me that you crossed that line. And so you have other problems, you know, but you're deeply embedded in community, in making community, in being community and doing that work. We asked a question, you know, to our listeners, and we said, how many people feel as if they're part of a community? There are a lot of studies at the moment about loneliness as an epidemic, you know, particularly, I would say, not only, but particularly amongst the youth. And it was interesting. The survey came back with different results. It was actually almost like a third, but there were a third of people who felt that they didn't feel a sense of any community. You know, so a third said, yes, we are. A third said, yes, no, we're not. And then a third was like, well, we feel neither here nor there. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about the feeling of being part of a community. If this is something you have grappled with yourself, if it's something you have encountered in the people that work with you and in your movement, and how the work you do is, you know, which is very much grounded in grassroots, how it is a force for change, you know, why this work is so powerful and why it's a force for change.
Amazing. So I think my generation is having a hard time to feel part of a community because we are under the capitalist system and the globalization and the neoliberalism. And what does it mean in practical ways? It means that the neoliberal system said to us that, oh, do you want to be successful in life? You need to have things. You need to buy. You need to have a huge house. You need to have an amazing car. You need to make a lot of trips. You need to be on the beach. You need to go to another country. You need to take photos and share on your Instagram. It's hard to feel part of community because we are under this kind of system and people, they are not talking with others anymore. For me, I think Engajamundo, the Brazilian NGO, was the first community that I could see myself, because you have no idea. It was a lot of young people with a lot of energy saying, we can make the change. We are part of the solution. I was like, yes, we can. So I think be with them gave me the power to build the same environment in my local reality, because Engajamundo is all of Brazil, a lot of states. So my friends at Engajamundo, they were virtual. And I understood that this is the community that I want to be part of. What more? So I realized that I am Black. I want to be more with Black people. I see myself as an activist. So I want to be with activists. For me, I was creating the communities that I'd like to be part of. I was intentionally searching these communities and asking to be part of. Like Black people, people who have the same skin color as me. We were slavery. We were slave. We were working for free. So now we are in vulnerable areas. We are in marginalized communities. We need to face a lot of problems to be in the same level as white people. So it's not your fault. But can be a little bit vague to say, oh, it's the system fault. So I like to talk about solutions. How can we solve this problem? We need public policies. We need public policy, especially to Black people, especially to single mothers, especially to Black kids. We need to work with politicians to solve this challenge. But another challenge, who are the politicians in Brazil? White men, white rich men that do not advocate for Black people.
Thank you, Amanda. I mean, you've just described so many issues that, of course, are, specific to Brazil, but are replicated in so many places around the world. I'd be really interested to know, because this episode is all about community and how community can actually support us with all of this pain that we're experiencing, how community can be a source of mutual support. How can we, and what can we do to foster this sense of community outside of these systems of oppression in order to provide that support for ourselves, in order to provide that support for each other, for people who are feeling this isolation or feeling or experiencing this discrimination? How is it that we can build community, build strong communities, build solidarity and resistance?
Joycelyn, this is the question of my life. If you know the answer, please let me know, because it's hard. I don't know. I am doing my best, but I think, in my opinion, the solution is on the grassroots, is in the community. We cannot wait, oh, this politician will save my life, this white savior. No, he will not come. No. So I think one way to build strong communities, we need to understand the local problems, and we need to understand how can we solve these local problems in a local level. I will give you an example. Here in my community, Brasilândia, we are facing a lot of floods. Many people, they lose everything because of the floods. And when I was a kid, I faced floods so many times. My kitchen used to get under the water because of the rains. It's not because of the rains. In Portuguese, we say, não é culpa da chuva. It's not the rent's guilt. It's not. It's the lack of urban planning for vulnerable communities. So I think one thing that we need to do to build strong communities is stay together. My grandmother, she used to help my mother with the floods a lot. And I remember one night, I woke up in the middle of the night, it was raining a lot. I listened my mother crying. She was in the kitchen and she was talking and she was saying to my grandmother, I cannot do anymore. It's horrible. I cannot do anymore. And my mother, she was like, taking the water. My grandmother, she was taking the water off the kitchen and she say, hey, Gislade, the name of my mother is Gislade. Hey, Gislade, that's okay. I am with you. You're not alone. We can do this together. You're not alone. And these episodes marked my life, because if my mother will be just by herself, she would stay in our kitchen crying. But she had the help of my grandmother. And so I think the first step to build a strong community is stay together, is to have the support of our family, our neighbors, our friends, and understand that we don't need to face by ourselves our problems. We don't need to face alone. The second point, we need to develop a more inclusive communication, because we need to put people together, we need to understand how to communicate with each person, what each person is facing in the moment, and develop empathy with their problems and show that we have a common goal. Because the problem of a friend is not just his problem. If he's my friend, it will be my problem. If he's part of my community, it's not his problem, it's the problem of a community. And the third step, in my opinion, we need to develop a common plan to face the challenge together. If we stay together, if we learn how to communicate, and if we develop a common goal, a common plan to face the challenge, I think this is the beginning of creating a strong community.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I mean, those points are so key, and I think can be generalized and implemented by people in so many different communities. So thank you so much for your contributions and for telling us your story and for sharing your story with us. It's really inspiring.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I always find it so heartening to meet people like Amanda. You know, it was great to just connect with her and someone who's so powered by or generated, by the mission. I think what I then hear in, let's say, community action and around climate change, or is that it's an opportunity for connection. And of course, there's something. There's nothing as connecting as purpose. I'm loving this idea that it's, the power of the climate action in terms of loneliness is that we come together on an aligned purpose, and there's an outcome. And I just feel like listening to what she's doing and what it's taking is so hopeful in its nature. It's interesting because she's an individual talking about the activism work she's doing, but also very clear about the ways in which the system, contributes to the problem. And so much of her work is about shifting the system. It makes it feel available. It really makes it feel like it's to hand. It doesn't feel easy because one can tell what it takes for her to do her work. But it certainly makes it feel available. And I sort of come away from the conversation feeling really hopeful, having a clear sense of how change is happening, and can happen and is happening in my lifetime, and what it looks like, and what it can continue to look like.
Yeah, I think it's really important that she brought in those stories of despair, or those moments, when she was describing her mum's feelings of despair about being on the front lines of the climate crisis. Or when we talk about community, it's not that action is lacking in challenges or in tribulations. It's the fact that the only way that we can get through, and we have to go through, is to be in community with each other, is to provide that sense of support with each other, and that change happens despite setbacks. And it kind of reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from Donella Meadows, which is that there's too much good news for complacency, but there's too much bad news for complacency, but there's too much good news for despair. And I think at the heart of her story, of Amanda's story, is that so much change happens, can happen, must happen, and will happen despite the challenges that we face, and that we can get through that together. And, you know, we can zoom in or zoom out of that in many different directions. Like, we can speak about the challenges of the climate crisis globally, but also of the challenges that we face in our local environment as well. And I think it's great to have that hope that's not void of understanding that this change happens despite overwhelm, despite despair.
The role of language, again, for me, comes up in the conversation with Amanda. You know, when the time comes to some of the change making, she's having a conversation with her parents, or she's learning that, okay, this is not how to communicate if I want to bring change. It seems like it happened instinctively, but she really landed in the very heart of the whole issue, which is how do we talk about this, you know, in a way that doesn't alienate, terrify, you know, have people dismiss. And she just sort of landed into right the center of that. And I guess that's become her life's work.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I think, you know, a real lesson there about change is that change happens through genuine connection, not through a kind of disconnected idea of what we're supposed to be, who we're supposed to be, or how we're supposed to act, but that change happens in our lifetime because of the connections that we create with other people and our ability to see them and to meet them where they are as they see us and meet us where we are at the same time. And I think that's beautiful.
At the end of each of these episodes, we always like to leave you with ideas about how you can get into action and get involved. And, you know, in terms of this topic we've had, there are many different ways. You might be somebody who you are living in the city, you are experiencing this sense of isolation. You look around you, you notice that there are things that aren't working. You see the effects of the oppressive system that you live within, perhaps, and you're confronted by that, but also feel in a way powerless, or just like you're just this one person. What are some ways maybe to start to feel a sense of community and connect with others around the things that matter to you? Joycelyn, I wonder if you want to throw in some ideas there.
Yeah, I think there are many really kind of easy introductory ways to start to get a sense of community. And I'm pretty sure most communities will have one of these offerings. There might be a local environmental group. Maybe you live near a particular, there might be local council groups that are protecting particular areas. Like, for example, where I live in Cambridge, there's the Friends of Paradise Woodland, which is a community of people who volunteer and look after, clean, maintain this very small protected woodland. Or you might live near a river. There might be a local initiative working to protect a local natural resource. There might be a local group also tackling the climate crisis on a wider scale. So maybe setting up protests, working together to create policy or resist systems of oppression within your local area. So check out your local community boards. On Google, you can do a quick search and you're sure to find something. But I want to mention here that, you know, the climate crisis, environmental crisis are not just individual issues. We can all compost and protect and plant as much as we want. And this does materially change and shift the systems that we live in locally. But we also have, there's a need to also tackle and resist systems of oppression on a larger scale that really limit us from making the change that we want to. You know, we can't all of the change that we need on the local level. We also need to make change on a national and a global level.
Thank you for listening to this episode of SystemShift. In our next episode, we're asking the question, AI is changing elections. How can we protect democracy? Subscribe to SystemShift wherever you get your podcasts.